This tutorial is for Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind-off. I'm going to show you how to use it for 1x1 ribbing. It's a nice looking bind-off and does give you a surprising amount of stretch. This is great for socks, sleeves, any ribbing where you want a relatively invisible bind-off and some nice stretch. I'm going to start by using a needle that is a little smaller than my original needle. This will just keep the bind-off nice and tidy and neat. So here is knit 1, which is how we're going to start. Just knit the knit stitch. And next is a purl stitch. Before every purl stitch, you're going to do a yarn over by bringing the yarn between your needles and then looping it over the needle, what feels like twice. And then you purl into the stitch. Now you bring the yarn to the back and bind off that yarn over and knit stitch. It can be a little tight to get in there, but be patient and work it off. Now we have a knit stitch. Before every knit stitch, you're going to do a backward yarn over, coming over the top back to the back, and then knit into your knit stitch. Now you're going to bind off that yarn over and the stitch. You can do these separately as I am here or together. And now we have a purl stitch. Before every purl stitch, we bring the yarn between the needles and loop it around the needle twice. Make the purl stitch, bring the yarn to the back between the needles, and then bind off that yarn over and stitch. We're just going to keep repeating this. There's a knit stitch. We're going to yarn over backwards, knit into the knit stitch, and bind off the yarn over and the stitch, pulling it right over top there. Now we have a purl stitch. So we're going to yarn over between the needles, knit the purl stitch or purl the purl stitch, bring the yarn to the back, and cast off the yarn over in the stitch. Here's the knit stitch. So we're going to do a backwards yarn over, knit into the knit stitch, and bind off the yarn over, bind off the regular stitch. This time I did it individually. You can do either way. Bring the yarn to the front between the needles and loop it over, purl into the purl stitch, bring the yarn back, and bind off the yarn over and the other stitch. Now we're at a knit stitch. Just keep on doing this same pattern until you get to the last stitch. Here we are. On the last stitch, it's a purl, so we're going to bring the yarn between the needles, loopity-loop, purl the purl, and now we're going to bind off the last 2 stitches here. There we go. Pull the yarn through, clip it off. Now you'll need to weave in the tail, and you've got a great bind-off. Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind-off. I hope this has been helpful. If you're interested in learning about more bind-offs for 1x1 ribbing, check out my tubular bind-off tutorial and my Hiya Hiya Grandma's stretchy bind-off tutorial, as well as a deep dive comparing all 3 of these bind-offs.